PAS or M. Everyone has a plan until the light fades. Hello, I'm Jack, a scientist and street photographer, and by the time you're watching this, I'll be in Japan. It is a family holiday, so I'll be catching Pokemon by day for my daughter, chasing neon lights by night for me. Two types of shooting that use very different muscle memory. So today, let's talk about 6 settings you should master on the Nikon ZF, day versus night. But first, I have a confession. I'm jealous of everyone's family photos, specifically how they feel about their photos. Every other parent seems to be content with just taking smartphone family snaps, but sadly for my back and wallet, that will never be me. I'm constantly switching gear in pursuit of the best image quality for the project of my lifetime, becoming a dad. I've shot primarily with Fujifilm, Sony, and now the Nikon ZF. And the biggest lesson I've learned after 100,000 frames, mono no aware, the beauty of things as they pass us by. Setting 6, places versus faces. By daytime, I like to shoot for the geometry, look for the patterns, looking for the architecture, whereas at nighttime, I like to shoot for the subject, looking for individual isolated subjects. Depending on how you shoot, this means tweaking your autofocus settings. 3D or spot tracking is the best torture test of any system's autofocus, but if you're shooting for places during the day, then you really want subject detection to be turned off so the focus point doesn't move every time a face appears in frame. You can't program a function button to turn subject detection off on the Nikon ZF, but here's my workaround. Go to Pencil, the third menu on the left, and F1 to customize the eye menu. Program one of the tiles for AF area mode subject detection and another one for metering. More on this later in the video. As long as this tile is highlighted on the eye menu, it's always just one press of the eye button followed by one click on the command dial away from turning subject detection on and off. It's not quite as easy as a dedicated function button, but it comes pretty close. Fujifilm's X100 series is the perfect camera for family photos, or so I thought. I had the X100 ready to go at the hospital the day my daughter was born, but the stay at the hospital was longer than we expected. Maternity wards, let alone emergency rooms, aren't the best lit environments, and every shot was either too noisy or too shaky. I was downing a lot of coffee at that time, and in the end, I thought the fixed f2 lens on the X100 was the limiting factor. It was time to switch. Setting 5, the paradox of choice. You should pack lighter lenses during the day and faster, heavier glass at night. Travel days are long. A heavier lens, or worse, heavier lenses, actively discourage you from exploring more, carting around luggage and shopping bags in equal measure out during the day. Then at night, once you've dropped all of that off, you can go out again with fast glass. F1.2 won't feel too heavy because that's all you'll be carrying. On the ZF, you can also take advantage of its 8-stop IBIS. Go to Photo Shooting menu, vibration reduction set to on, normal. Sports mode works better if you're shooting fast, erratically moving subjects, but normal mode works better for static subjects. Then one option down, link VR to focus point. This is especially helpful for 3D tracking when your focus point is moving all over the frame. This lets me handle 1 second shutter speed pretty easily, even longer if I'm bracing against the wall, but this does change with the focal length. But worst case scenario, you can shoot 1/500th of a second or 1/250th of a second at night and push the ZF sensor to ISO 32,000. Pick a lane you're happy with and run your own race. Every parent has their favorite Bluey episode, and for me, it's Baby Race. Our daughter didn't start crawling till 12 months old, but despite all our anxiety around her walking, it was a blessing in disguise. At least she would stay still for poor old dad trying to get that shot. I did move from the X100F to the X-T3. Now I had access to f1.4 glass, lower noise and faster shutter speeds for those static indoor shots. The camera was getting a bit bigger, which meant it was harder to squeeze in diaper bags as an afterthought, and now I needed dedicated camera bags and accessories. You can find affiliate links to my favorite photo gear, including lightweight bags and straps from Wotancraft, in the description below. If you'd like to support the channel, I would also appreciate a like and a sub. The X-T3 was the perfect tool for capturing these moments, but it didn't last. Mono no aware, the beauty of things passing us by. Lower ISO doesn't automatically mean lower noise, which brings me to setting 4, mind over meter. During the daytime, you want to meter for the highlights. Make sure you don't blow any highlights shooting at an EV of -0.7, 0.3. Under the photo shooting menu for metering, I use high light weighted metering during the day to protect my highlights. You'll notice that your whole scene gets a bit dimmer in the setting because the ZF is actively trying to retrieve detail from the brightest part of the frame. During nighttime, you're going to mediate for the shadows. Make sure you get underexposed, that there's enough light hitting your sensor. You're raising your ISO to the sufficient level to not get too much noise. If you're forcing the ISO to artificially be low, but really it's just capturing pitch darkness, there's nothing to lift up in post. In Tokyo, the blown out highlights at night tend to be street lamps and neon signs, which doesn't matter to me as much as the businessmen walking across the street. So at night, I always expose to the right of the histogram. Rather than highlight weighted metering at night, you want to switch to matrix metering or average metering. This averages the brightness across the whole frame. Remember when we added metering to the eye menu earlier in the video? Eye menu, the metering tile highlighted, then either front or back command dial to toggle between matrix metering at night and highlight weighted metering during the day. Once you build this muscle memory, you get it in no time at all. When my daughter took her first steps at 18 months old, she made up for lost time. Everything was a mad dash to the finish line, and the lackluster continuous autofocus of the X-T3 reared its ugly head. Of course, my lack of skill was the biggest problem, but with every pair of baby shoes she outgrew came another reminder that these were once-in-a-lifetime moments I was missing. It was time to move on to full-frame Sony and its best-in-class autofocus, A7 IV and A7CR. I detect autofocus felt like magic. Selections of lenses, unmatched. But weirdly, IBIS, not that great. Sony colors, not the best. But the biggest flaw with the system was its lack of charm. The alpha bodies with G master lenses are a big, bulky, serious piece of kit. And I went from looking like a harmless hipster dad to being accused of being paparazzi to my own kid on 3 separate occasions. In the end, it was just too serious of a system for everyday family use, and it went back onto the shelf, mono no aware. Setting 3, the Chasm in PASM. During the day, you want to shoot in aperture priority mode, letting the camera decide most of the controls for you. And at night time, you should probably shoot in manual mode where you've got more control of the shutter speed, ISO, as well as the aperture, which most of the time is wide open at night. The way I have aperture priority set up is to go to the photo shooting menu, ISO sensitivity settings, and setting auto ISO sensitivity control to on. No matter what my top ISO dial is set to, the camera will always be in auto ISO setting. The dial just changes what the max ISO should be while in auto. So here I've set my max sensitivity to 32,000 and a minimum shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. If the top dial is set to C, it will just follow what I've set in the menu. And it's not until I dip below that ISO, 32,000, that the max ISO now starts to change to match what's on the top dial. Switching the ISO dial from C down to 12,800, still in aperture priority mode, changed the upper limit of my auto ISO settings without having to dive into the menus. Why did I choose 1/500th of a second? That's a fail-safe for when I'm on the move during the day, on bumpy trains, or ducking in and out of crowds at Shibuya Scramble. If your hands are steadier than mine, you can set this to 1/250th of a second for street photography. If I need a shutter speed slower than that, it's really quicker on the ZF just to switch it into manual mode via the switch on the top plate. In the pencil custom settings menu under F Control, go to F2, go down to the third tile on the right for command dial customization and select exposure settings. Under M mode, I have the front dial set for AV aperture and the rear dial set for TV shutter speed. But because my auto ISO sensitivity is still set to on, I still have auto ISO control in manual mode. At night time, I leave the ISO dial to C rather than try to mess with the upper limit of ISO too much in the dark. The childcare germs hit, all-night fevers, runny noses for months on end. Last year was filled with too many sick days off from work than I can count. The only escape I had was street photography after everyone went to bed. So all of a sudden, low light ability was the only thing that mattered. Out shooting on the streets after dark, I started to find the 61 megapixel files of the Sony A7CR cumbersome. Then came Nikon, retro charm and modern techno wizardry in equal measure. 24 megapixel sensor with high ISO performance usable up to 32,000. It's now become my daily carry for both street and family work, and I thought it was the perfect solution, but just in case it's not, I decided to hold on to my Sony kit for now. Setting 2, fine-tune the view. What I'm finding increasingly on this trip to Japan is that I'm shooting off the back LCD during the day, and that allows me to monitor the surroundings a little bit easier. Everything's very bright and well lit. To do this effectively, I customize the viewfinder button next to the EVF on the Nikon ZF. First, under the setup menu, go to limit monitor mode selection. I set it to automatic display switch, prioritize viewfinder 2, and uncheck the rest of the boxes. Prioritize viewfinder 1 only turns on the EVF when you bring the camera up to your eye. Mode 2 turns on the EVF for a few seconds when the camera turns on to start with, or when the shutter or AF buttons are activated. During the day, I have the screen open, the camera set to automatic display switch. Shooting off the back LCD most of the time, unless it's too bright, then I can bring the EVF up to my eye. Come nighttime, I close the screen. This then forces me to only use the EVF in its most responsive mode while saving battery life. This gives me a bit more isolation from the environment, just focusing on what I can control within this tiny box as the crowds pass me by. It was finally time for school. My daughter turned 5 and I have mixed emotions to say the least. I put together a photo book, and what began as a celebration of my daughter's milestone ended as an indictment of my indecision. Over 100,000 frames, taken with 7 cameras and a creative mishmash of looks and color science chaos. Every page of the photo book looked jarringly inconsistent, like my daughter was being photographed by different amateurs at random, not her dad keeping a steady record of the best days of our lives. I wish I knew then what I know now, that the only constant is change, and that my #1 job has to be being the most stable thing in her life for the rest of her life. Mono no aware, the beauty and melancholy of watching things pass us by. Not everything has to pass us by, and the final setting to master, setting 1, is location scouting by day, so you don't have to at night. You should try shooting in the same location during the day versus at nighttime to see if the same spot gives you a different ambience, you feel light hitting it differently, or maybe the architecture looks a little bit ominous during the day versus the nighttime. You'd be surprised how different a location can look day versus night. And the best part is you only have to do the legwork once to get double the creative possibilities. There's so many different ways to use the Nikon ZF, almost as many as the number of ways to grip the Nikon ZF. And in the next video, I'll go through all the most common grip options for better ergonomics on the ZF, including the one made out of unobtainium, the mythical Japan exclusive ZF GR1 that took me a week to track down in Tokyo. You'll find the video here, what is ready to go. I'm Jack, trying to capture the peace in each moment.